So welcome back to QUTCS Consulting Society's Coffee with a Consultant. Here at episode 2, we have Paul Catchlove, a project leader transformation in BCG Turn at Boston Consulting Group in Helsinki, Finland. And we're really excited to have you here today, Paul, to talk about your journey to management consulting. So without further ado, we might get you to talk a little bit about your experiences and what brought you to consulting.
Super. Well, thanks, Emma, for the opportunity. I think, so maybe a brief bit about my background. I spent actually the earlier part of my life doing something very, very different. I was a Catholic priest, and then while I loved ministry and being involved in that, I realised I wanted to get married and have a family, and so those two things weren't congruent. And so I had to look at different things to do. And I'd always had a bit of a passion for the law, and I've always liked the rigour of sort of argument and trying to sort of work through problems. And so I went and studied law at UT, and amazing experience, great opportunities. Really enjoyed my study and the relationships I sort of made both with staff and other student colleagues, and then practiced as a corporate M&A lawyer for a little while. And I was fortunate that I did reasonably well in that, and had some sort of some good recognition. I won the Australian Law Award, the Rising Star of the Year, and then the overall Excellence Award. And so law was definitely something that I thoroughly enjoyed doing. But my wife and I, and my wife is Finnish, and so we were looking at potential ways. We'd sort of met in Australia, and while we were married in Finland, we spent most of our married life in Australia, but wanted to make the move to Finland, and that meant as a lawyer I was going to have to requalify. So different legal systems, and so I started looking into different opportunities, and so I sort of fell into management consulting in a bit of a way, but I love it. I feel super fortunate to be in it, and I think I applied for a number of management consulting firms, and I was fortunate to get a number of offers, and BCG was one of them, and I had to pack up our lives in Brisbane and move over here, and I started as a consultant about 18 months ago, and then was super fortunate to be promoted to project leader about 6 months ago. Yeah, it's been a great journey.
Yeah, that's amazing, and the recognition you've received in the Australian legal sphere is outstanding. So it's very great that you're a QUT alumni as well in that regard. And so, what do you think was what drew you to consulting? Obviously, you've had a range of experiences.
Yeah, I think probably one of the main things is my desire to actually be someone who adds value to companies. I sort of always felt like something was a little bit missing when I was practicing law, that almost like maybe I was a bit of a necessary evil, that people, want to have lawyers around because, they need to know how to mitigate risk and, understand sort of contractual nuances and then get them out of difficult situations. But I was probably more about, in a sense, it was probably a bit more about cost avoidance, so helping companies avoid having to pay out certain things or getting a deal that was a little bit better for them than they otherwise would have got. Whereas in consulting, it's really about trying to add value to companies. So, for example, I mean, and it's crazy the sort of numbers, but I mean the last company I was working with, was a multi-billion-dollar company, and you're trying to add, significant improvement to the company's bottom line, and so how much profit they're actually making. And I mean, I love that. It's super challenging. it's demanding, it can be stressful, but really rewarding when you actually see, that you've been able to build something up, when you've been able to make something stronger. And the real sense of thankfulness and appreciation you actually get from, CEOs and other C-suite members, when you've spent time with them. It's super interesting. I think there's so many different parts of consulting, but the area that I seem to have fallen into and really love is major transformations or large-scale change of organisations. So it's traditionally, I think a lot of consulting firms sort of focus more on strategy and probably less on sort of implementation. Whereas now, one of the things that I do is, yes, we do a lot of the strategy work, but then it's about spending the time. So it might be a 12-month period with a company to actually implement that strategy, to implement those changes to improve that company's position.
Yeah, absolutely. And have you found that has changed in the current context, particularly with everything that's happening across the world with COVID or whatever else it may be?
Very much so. I think we've been fortunate that in many ways a lot of companies have been reaching out to us where they might have actually been putting off doing transformations and change because they need to actually strengthen themselves in what's a super difficult situation at the moment. COVID's just horrendous. You're talking about, say, companies that have factories where, if one member contracts COVID and, in the sort of the incubation period, they've spread that with other colleagues, you can literally shut down a factory. And so it's, how do you build in sort of resilience and redundancy systems, and, how do you improve, supply chain processes to ensure that critical parts are actually, are received when, the company that supplies those parts may be shut down for whatever reason, your normal supplier. It is a really, really complex system. Then with some of I've worked in a variety of different sectors, so sort of, but probably the two main areas have been industrial goods and consumer goods. And the consumer area, retail generally, is just really having a hard time. It's amazingly difficult to sell stuff if you can't actually open a shop, or if you can open a shop but no one will actually come to your shopping centre. Helping a lot of companies actually transition into a sort of an e-com strategy and an e-com platform. Those sort of things I find really enjoyable, because if we weren't involved, if we hadn't got involved in some of those changes, the company might not be able to exist, in the longer term. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's obviously a very important area to be in, particularly right now. And what would you say are the skills that you've gained that have been most important in your work at BCG?
I think, and a fair bit of this I think comes from my studies in the law, but it's having a bit of a critical mind, it's just really sort of trying to think about things. Can we do this better? Because you've got to remember, even the smallest incremental change in a company that's doing a lot of things, a lot of that particular process, can mean a lot of dollars or a lot of euros, of improvement. So I think, just having a real sort of critical mind and thinking about, what does this mean? Constantly asking yourself, how can we do this better? It may seem like a bit of a jump, but, when I was drafting contracts, I was thinking about the same thing. How can I make sure that, my client has, the best possible sort of situation, but also, that the terms are set up in such a way that, should they need to terminate the contract, or, should there be some sort of liability that can be minimized? Like you're constantly trying to think, how can I provide the best situation possible? And I think laws are a brilliant foundation for that. Probably the other thing I think that law's great about doing is actually just developing your interpersonal skills. I mean, you're forced to sort of get up in front of people and speak in front of people. And I would spend, 8 to 10 hours a day now, either in face-to-face meetings or in Zoom calls, talking with people, and trying to, sort of say, look, this is the way, that I think we should sort of go forward, or, this is what the data says, and so based upon that, we should do X, Y, Z, and I think, so having the ability to be able to communicate clearly, to communicate succinctly, I think that's super important. I think law teaches you very much, a lot of those skills.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, critical thinking, as well as being able to present that in a way that's able to be understood, it's two really important points. So maybe shifting slightly, what would you say is the key differences you've found working in different countries, or kind of some key observations you've found, particularly given that they might be quite different? I'm not really sure what it would be like to work in Finland.
Yeah, well, look, and I'm fortunate. So some of my work is here in Finland, but I've also worked in Poland. I've worked in Amsterdam. I've worked in Sweden. Worked in the US. So I've worked in Paris, in France. So I've worked in a bunch of different countries, and I think there are cultural nuances that are different in each of the places. And but I was, I'm probably fortunate. I lived 3 years of my life in Italy previously. I think marrying someone from a different culture actually helps you to understand sort of cultural nuance and cultural difference, because things that you take for granted in in one place as just being, this is how we do it, you just can't. One of the things that is amazing, say, about the Finnish culture is the real honesty that Finns have, and sometimes it can be sort of, it can feel somewhat blunt, So if you actually ask if how am I actually going, in your work, say it's a one of your bosses or senior colleague, they will give you a very, very honest response, and you need to sort of be prepared for that. Whereas, sometimes as an Australian, maybe you might ask that, but really what you're after is a bit of affirmation that you're doing the right things. And those things then translate through to how you actually do business, and then, when you're making sort of significant transformational change in a company, you need to be able to think about, culturally, how do I sort of embed this down here in this place? How do I make sure this sticks here? And how do I motivate and move these people, to get a little bit more for the company in this place, because it is different from place to place. There's a lot of similarities, but there is nuance that I think if you don't pick up on it, you miss out, and it's not as effective as it could be.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And obviously you've had a really broad range of experiences across a broad range of countries, so that's amazing. So maybe narrowing down into your work at BCG a little bit, how would you describe your role, and if there is a typical week, because I'm sure there's probably not, what do you think that would look like for you?
Yeah, so I suppose there's some sort of, I don't know whether you call them bookends, because it's not at the beginning or the end of the week, but, paginations that happen throughout the week. So generally speaking, if you run a case or a program, transformation program, there's certain set things that happen. So, for example, you might have a case team meeting with your team. You might have daily stand-ups where, you're sort of sitting there with the team and trying to sort of work out what are the next steps. and planning that out in more detail. There's often sort of client interfaces, whether it's, in person or in Zoom. It's, it's picking up, and trying to work out what is the critical data that you actually need to be assessing to make, the best possible choices. And so, it's a number of those things. So my role is more to be sort of now a conduit between the client to understand what it is they're after, and then my team. So I have a team of associates and consultants who sort of I work with, and so they do much of the sort of the analysis, and so we'll do some sort of storylining together and sort of say, well, look, I think this is where we need to be going. I might put together what we call a straw man of a deck of PowerPoint slides, which we'll then use to communicate to the client what we should be doing. And that straw man might literally be, a series of whatever number of slides with just some sort of text boxes where I sort of say, I think this is what we need to have here, and this is what we should have here, and so that it's clear that we're sort of, we're all pushing forward in the one direction. And so that there's some of the things that sort of, generally speaking, happen throughout a week. But then we also have some sort of fun stuff here in the office. So I do a lot of interviewing, which I love. I love bringing on board new team members, and because I find it's a place full of like super intelligent people, and so every week and every exchange, I learn something from them. It's I often say to some of my colleagues, I feel like the dumbest person in the room. But it's because there's so much wisdom and knowledge and just passion and energy and interest from from my colleagues. And I'm one of the older sort of people here in the office. So we've got about maybe there's probably 150 of us now, I think, here in the office. And I'm probably one of the sort of the 10 oldest people in the office. So it's also nice to see, these associates sort of coming out of, or visiting associates, coming from finishing their university studies or what have you. And you can still learn things. I think that's what gives me a lot of passion and energy here is, my desire to want to learn and grow. And it happens each and every day, which is super cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so I can see that there's obviously a common thread of needing the ability to communicate and communicate effectively, not only, of course, with your clients, but with your team and also onboarding potential consultants as well. So, yeah.
That's a really good point, because I think because of the sort of the hours that we work and the intensity that we work at, the one thing you don't want to be doing is wasting time, having people sort of spin their wheels. And so making sure that everyone is aligned on what the next steps should be, and making sure that it's super clearly communicated, that's just absolutely essential.
Yeah, that's great. It's very interesting. And so maybe in terms of the experiences you've had so far at BCG, what types of industries or sectors have you worked at? I know we spoke briefly about some flotation.
Yeah, so I've spent a bit of time in industrial goods, so working with companies that manufacture sort of products, and consumer goods as well. So both sort of fast-moving consumer goods and and consumer more generally. They're probably the two main areas, and I've done sort of a spattering of other smaller things in say the energy sector, but it's one of these sort of places where while you have the opportunity to impact what industries and sectors you work in, and in what topics, if you're open to doing something totally different, there'll be that opportunity there for you. I had no background at all in sort of industrial goods, and in a very, very short period of time, you end up picking up this knowledge because you just spend an intense amount of time and focus, trying to help understand, the client's problems, and then bring some sort of, wisdom and energy to resolving them.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure coming from a third kind of party perspective, that would be really interesting for them to see what your proposals would be. And so has there been a particular case broadly that you've enjoyed the most?
To be honest, probably my first case, because it provided me with the steepest learning curve. I remember maybe being about 4 weeks into consulting and thinking, oh, what have I done here? I'm way out of my depth. I've got no idea what I'm doing, and yet the feedback I was getting from sort of partners and the like, and even the client, was very, very positive. But I just felt that, it was everything just felt so unknown. But sort of then getting past that and realizing, I can do this, and this is, it is achievable. And I mean, even I was fortunate that I think generally speaking, in consulting, it's a 2-year sort of, roughly sort of 2 years to move from step to step. So, 2 years as an associate, 2 years as a consultant, 2 years as a project leader, and so on. And so to sort of then get promoted from consultant to project leader in 12 months, I was sort of a bit blown away by it. And I do love it. I now just, I thrive on the energy of working with teams. I thrive on just being able to try and turn my mind to something that others have, but maybe haven't been able to solve. It's just a lot of fun. But I think the first case where I had so many of those, where I felt like my learning curve was just almost like sort of a vertical, line. That was super fun.
Yeah, I'm sure it'd be difficult not to have a sense of imposter syndrome when you're learning something new every day. But it's obviously, you've obviously excelled and done incredible.
And it is, the whole imposter syndrome thing is it's so real. You sort of need to tell yourself, that you can do it, and rely upon the feedback that you've received, and the both sort of written and verbal, and we do a lot of, we get feedback on every case or program that we're part of. If it's a longer term case, every 3 months. So you constantly having people who are trying to sort of shape, form, develop you, and so in that environment, it's also very easy to sort of see that you're not quite there yet. And the reality is, none of us ever are there wherever there is, because it is about constantly trying to improve and develop. And, even the most senior partners at BCG, even the CEO, Rich Lesser, whenever he gets his sort of reviews, there are opportunities for development, areas for development. And I think, that's a great example of, even someone who's been in this business for, 40 years, you can still learn. There's still better ways of doing things.
So it seems that the learning curve never ends, but obviously supported very well throughout the entire process, which is fantastic. And so, given that you have been so successful, even in your short stint at BCG, what would you say would be your top recommendation for someone who's looking to do something similar to you and excel or enter the field of management consulting?
I think probably the biggest tip I would say is make sure you love doing problem solving, because when, you know, if you love doing problem solving, then you'll find a place here, and you'll never feel like you're working. You know, it'll feel like you're just sort of turning your mind to new things. And, you know, that's not to say that, you know, that you won't feel some sort of pressure or stresses at times, because, you know, sometimes the drive to sort of get impact as quickly as possible is very real. But I would say, you know, when you're sort of thinking about applying for a place like this, we've got quite a detailed recruitment process. You know, do some research on that. If you enjoy the preparation for the interviews, likely you'll enjoy the work. If you don't enjoy the preparation, that's probably an indication that maybe you know, you won't find the sense of joy and satisfaction in this work, that you might doing something else, and maybe to think about sort of what other options are on the table for you.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip. So we're drawing it to the end of this. So we wanted to say thank you very much for being here.
No worries at all. Privilege.
And we've got one more question for you, and that is our weekly picks. So basically what our weekly picks are is something that you think is interesting, something that you've learned, something that you think would be useful for everyone to know, a podcast, a book, a current affairs issue, whatever. And what would you say is your top pick?
Well, actually, maybe if I say two things. One is an activity that I would encourage people to do, and that is, so I have, I'm a bit sort of old school. Everyone uses sort of electronic diaries and stuff, but I still I write everything down and sort of cross stuff out, but that's not it. It's this one. So this is basically my learnings book. And so I, you know, if I've got a new learning, or if I've had a conversation with someone where there's some sort of a wisdom that I picked up, or I read a book, you know, or if I have an idea for, I don't know, it might even be a new innovation or something, I put it down here, and I have sort of a series of these sort of that, you know, I just keep filling them up, and for me, it's a way of making sure that I distill down the learnings that life has, you know, that things provide for me, rather than just sort of keeping going forward, because I find, you know, reflection is really important to make sure that you can capture that wisdom. So that's one. So sort of an activity. And then the second would actually be a book that I read recently by Mark Manson. And pardon the crassness of this, but it's called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a, and you can fill in the bleep at the end there. But it's a brilliant book. And one of the takeaways that, you know, it was super clear to me in that was, you know, how important it is to actually to love the journey. You know, often in life we have, you know, this goal that we aspire to, you know, and so everything is about sort of going for that goal, but we find the journey to get there painful and, you know, or challenging or difficult, you know, and one of the things that Mark sort of suggests is, you know, given the fact that the journey is sort of 9/10 of the you know, the whole sort of thing, why would we want to spend sort of 90% of our time doing something that we hate just to get somewhere else? So just, I think, always thinking about, you know, why we do what we do. You know, life is pretty short, and you know, it's finite, it comes to an end. You know, have a life of value and meaning and purpose, you know, do something you love doing. And so, you know, maybe read that book and have a bit of a think about some of those thoughts and ideas.
Those are great recommendations. I think it would be a goldmine having a look through your series of books. And I absolutely would advocate for that book as well. I read that in Bhutan and it was very a reflective time for me as well. And I think there's some great takeaways. So thank you for those fantastic recommendations. And thank you
Awesome.
for being with us here today. We really appreciate it again, and you've had some great insights, so we can't thank you enough, and I'm sure the entire QUT community will be very happy to hear that you've done so well and be happy to hear your thoughts and recommendations.
Oh, thanks heaps, Em. And if I can say, you know, if there are any QUT students who are thinking about a career in consulting, you know, I don't have massive amounts of time, and sometimes it takes me a bit longer to get back to people than I would probably like. But I'm always happy for people to reach out, and I'll always provide whatever advice or wisdom I can that would help you, you know, in looking into a career in consulting.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Hey, well, greetings from Finland.